if I was to sum up in a single word, feedback from members around the SQA, it would be workload. It's a huge concern around the workload implications of delivering effectively the learning for students. But then adding on to that, the additional assessment. I think one of the messages that hasn't got through is the limited range of evidence that has been looked for. So there has been a little bit of banking of evidence, in my view unnecessarily, because people weren't sure what the system was going to be. Now we do have some clarity around what should now be happening. But the part of the workload driver is the quality assurance mechanisms that are being looked for. When we had units previously, the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of units and workload, it wasn't necessarily the units themselves, it was the quality assurance procedures around that, because that's quite labour intensive for staff. So if you are like cross-marking, double marking, standardising approaches, all of that is time consuming. And there is a real challenge around how you do that remotely if we stay in lockdown for any length of period, because in school there's just a facilitation of that process in a more straightforward fashion. So I think that that's been the biggest concern. EIS is involved in the National Qualifications Group, so we're part of the conversation. I know that we have SQA speaking later. We could do a word bingo on how many times the word co-creation pops up, because it seems to be the in word at the moment. There is still quite a lot of contested opinion around messaging, so there are still tensions around level of quality assurance, trust and professional judgment. I think as a system we do want to get this right, because we want young people to be accredited appropriately. But there is, it would be wrong to suggest that there is a simple solution to it. There's a lot of hard work involved in delivering this, and an extended lockdown period will just make that even more challenging, I think.
Just before we move on to other panellists, Larry, can I just ask you, obviously as you're aware, we're talking to the SQA shortly. What would your number one ask be of this year's plans from an SQA point of view? Obviously there was a tremendous amount of upheaval last year in terms of the professional judgment of teachers and what the SQA did to those judgments, and we're not quite sure yet what levels of moderation will take place. And of course, as we know, even what the work that they did was then further reversed by ministerial intervention. So what would your biggest ask be of the SQA if they were listening to this?
Yeah, I'm sure they are listening. Well, we already have a commitment that there'll be no algorithms, and in a sense, although the SQA is the final arbiter, any dialogue that is required around standards should predate the final submission. So last year we said, if you find a school's figures seem to be out of line, have a professional dialogue with them. And the SQA couldn't do that because of time demands. So we think all of that professional dialogue has to happen beforehand. Ultimately, for an evidence-based award system, if people disagree with the outcome, then it's for the SQA to deal with the appeals process and look at the evidence and make a judgment. I think, our key, and this will not surprise them because I've repeated it in several meetings, our key ask is that they actually trust the professionalism of teachers and work on that as the foundation of the system, rather than trying to caveat that in terms of their own procedures, which sometimes can be seen as quite bureaucratic by practitioners in the classroom.